Day 165. Captain Nunez arrived on the train that stopped outside town at the blown-up trestle. He stepped off and looked around. He was wearing jeans and a black hoodie and a baseball cap. As far as anyone knew by looking at him, he was just another nameless civilian coming into the area in search of work. Word had spread throughout the state and beyond that the military was hiring civilians to work on the rebuilding of the trestle, and that the railroad was also hiring workers to revitalize the old track system and grow the train service. Edwin Nunez was well versed in the art of becoming the gray man. He could blend himself seamlessly into any crowd without so much as a second look from anyone. Today, he was here to meet with Lieutenant Saunders. Lieutenant Saunders, of course, had no way of knowing that Captain Nunez was coming. Section 7 had completed the vetting of Lieutenant Saunders, and Captain Nunez was going to meet with him in person to finalize his recruitment. So far, their communications all had dealt in the theoretical or hypothetical. Nunez was careful not to give away any mission specifics, while at the same time figuring out where Saunders stood on certain issues and ideologies. With the vetting completed and a strong sense of who Lieutenant Saunders was, Nunez now had the most sensitive part of the recruitment process before him. He must proceed very cautiously with Saunders. If he had misread him, even in the slightest way, the mission OPSEC could be in jeopardy. Even though Captain Nunez had done this countless times before and was very proficient at it, he still needed to move ahead very carefully. Nunez boarded the old bus that was used to bring people and supplies from the train into town. When the bus arrived, Nunez got off and headed for the diner. Buddy Tanner, watching through his monocular from the ridge, didn't even give him a second glance as he scanned by him, observing the crowd. Roger woke early. He sat against his tree looking out over the expansive valley that rolled out below him. He read his Bible every morning and absolutely loved the view from this spot in the mountains. Callie woke and fed her kids. She approached Roger and sat beside him. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked him. "I'm sure," he replied. Then he smiled at her and asked, "Are you sure that you want to do this?" She told him that she needed herself and her children to be with family. "Absolutely sure," she said. Roger got up and broke camp and packed the horses. He asked to see the judge that Greg had given her. When she produced it, Roger emptied the .45 rounds from it and put them in his pocket. He took out a bag with 410 shells in it and started loading the gun with them. When he closed the cylinder and handed it back to her, he said, "The first round is birdshot. It will shoot a wide pattern, and there's not much chance of missing whatever it is you're firing at. The rest are slugs, and they should finish the job. If you need to use it, just be steady, and don't forget to breathe," he told her. She nodded and placed the gun in her jacket pocket. He pulled out a map, scratched some notes with a pencil, and drew a line over the route that they would take and folded the map back up and placed it in his saddlebag. Before they rode down out of the mountain, he paused to take one last look at the view. He reached for her hand, and together they prayed for a safe journey. They both knew that they would need God's hedge of protection around them if they were to make it safely to their destination. They set out, heading into the valley below. Major Stillman was not happy when he heard the news of the board's vote to decrease his involvement in the area and eventually end it altogether. He shouted at his clerk, sitting in the outer office, "Get Carl Fairley over here right now." The clerk informed him that Carl had not yet reported in for the day. Major Stillman looked at his watch and mumbled to himself, "What in the world is going on around here?" Then he told the clerk, "I want to know the second he arrives in town." He stormed off and went over to the trading post. In the back office, sitting at his desk, was Leroy McMillan. The major charged in and started screaming at him about the vote and why hadn't he been able to steer it in their direction. How useless and incompetent he was. McMillan just sat there and listened, taking it all in. Fact was, he was afraid of Major Stillman. He wasn't about to challenge him in any way. "I'm sorry," McMillan said. "What could I have done about it? We were outvoted 3-2, and that new member you put on the board didn't do us any favors, Major." Stillman glared at McMillan, and he instantly stopped talking and just looked down at his desk. Major Stillman leaned forward, and with a single sweep of his right arm, he cleared the contents of McMillan's desk onto the floor. "Useless," he repeated as he stormed out. When he walked back into his own office, his clerk handed him the minutes from last night's board meeting. "I just need your signature on this, Major, and I can include it in today's mail." Major Stillman took it from him and started to read it. He stopped, looked at the clerk with fury in his eyes, and crumpled the report up and tossed it in the waste pail. No, the record of the vote would not be going up the chain. At least not today. When one of Carl's deputies came in to feed the prisoners their breakfast, he found a note from Carl. It instructed him to turn the second prisoner free if he had sobered up and calmed down. As he opened the cell door to set Lee free, Lee grabbed one of the paper sacks from the deputy's hands and walked past him and out the door. It contained an egg sandwich from the diner and a cup of coffee. Lee figured the least they could do was give him breakfast before he left. He walked out and around back up to the ridge where Buddy Tanner was waiting. He told him everything he learned from Hammer as he ate his sandwich. Buddy looked over at him and reached down and helped himself to the second half of the sandwich. Lee thought about letting him know how much this displeased him, but he quickly thought better of it. For a brief moment, Lee, who was sitting behind Buddy, entertained the notion that he could pick up the rock that was beside him and in one quick motion deliver it to the back of Buddy's head, ending his miserable life. Then he, like Roger, could be free to live his own life. He reasoned that maybe by doing so he could avoid the fate of Little Bear or Hammer, who without a second thought was exiled to jail by Buddy when they could have just as easily walked in there and set him free. Lee stared at Buddy for a second, and then the thought was gone. Lee knew that Roger would never escape the MC's wrath. Buddy would make sure of that, even if simply for no other reason than to dissuade other members from having thoughts like the one Lee had just had. Lee remembered how, as a young man, he first came to be with the MC, how the life had attracted him, the parties and the women, the way they could do whatever they wanted to do with little or no boundaries. He remembered how freeing it seemed to not have to get up every day and slog off to some mundane job just to eke out a living. But now, here he was all these years later, a slave to this life, an indentured servant to the likes of men like Buddy Tanner. As he pondered his life and where it had brought him, he was not happy. The party faded somewhere along the way. He wasn't even sure when or where or how. He just woke up one day a few years back and realized his life was not his own, and there was nothing he could do about it. Nothing that he knew about, anyway. Then he thought of Roger, his brother in the MC for many years. He had escaped. He had taken his life back. He may die for it, but at least he will die a free man, Lee thought. At that moment, even as they hunted Roger, Lee couldn't help but envy him just a little bit. Buddy looked back at Lee again. He told him to stay put and keep his eye on the platform. I'm going down to get a letter off to our contact in the railroad back home. I want him to get word back to the club to send more guys up. 6 should do the job. If they travel separately in pairs, they won't attract attention. Lee asked what the job was he was talking about. Buddy just told him that he was still working out the details, and it was a need-to-know basis. He would let him know when the time came for him to know. With that, he got up and doubled back and around down the hill into town. As Lee lay prone on the bank watching the platform through the scope of his rifle, as his master had ordered, he watched Buddy descend the bank and walk toward the street. There was a drainage culvert just this side of the road. Lee could see into it clearly, but he knew that the base of the culvert was too low to be visible from the street or the platform. The rifle, like most of the club's equipment, was military grade. The club's weapons dealing enterprise had earned them some high-level military contacts, and the money that they made from it afforded them to buy the very best gear. The .30-06 rifle Lee held was equipped with the finest optics, as well as a silencer and a flash suppressor combo. The rifle was flat black, lightweight polymer with camo patterns sprayed over the top of the finish. There was not one piece on the gun that could reflect sunlight. As he watched Buddy enter into the lowest part of the drainage culvert, a few yards from the shoulder of the road, he pulled the bolt back and advanced around into the chamber. In his mind, he thought to himself, I could end this right here and now. Without a second thought, his instincts got the best of him. He pulled the trigger, and the round took the back of Buddy's head off. Buddy fell into the culvert, motionless, as blood spilled out around him. Lee quickly scanned the street and the platform. No one, it seemed, had even noticed. Just like that, Lee was free. In one unbridled release of emotion and instinct, Buddy Tanner was gone. The club would not be receiving word to send more men. Roger would be free to disappear, and so would Lee. Lee stripped the scope, the silencer, and the thermal optics off of the rifle. He placed them in his rucksack along with the shell casing from the bullet that had ended Buddy Tanner's life. He rose to his feet, put the rucksack on his back, and turned and walked away into the woods. He headed in the direction of the church. Thanks for tuning in. Join us next week as we find out what happens when Captain Nunez confronts Lieutenant Saunders, and Major Stillman learns that Carl and Zach have moved their horse breeding operation to a hidden location. If you are enjoying this series, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Also, please consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already done so. Thank you, and God bless you.